All right, so Wednesday this week, you're going to have another work day to continue to work on your anatomic illustrations, derived from Horos references. But today I want to go off on a little bit of a tangent and continue to work with Horos, but this time show you the animation tools that are built into Horos and have you all create your own simple little movie directly out of Horos. So let's go ahead and open Horos. All right, and I've got one of the data sets that I copied out of the courses file share just as a demo. And I'm going to pick, I happen to pick the Mannix one just because it's one I use a lot. When I expand the Mannix data set, I can see that there are 4 different studies in here. But if I look way over at number of images, I can see that there's one that has 460 images. The others have 48, and one of them only has 1 image. So I definitely want the one with the largest number of images. So as I always do, I'm going to start out by clicking the 2D button. Then I'm going to create a 3D volume rendering. Actually, let me create a surface rendering first. And I'm just going to choose the skin preset value and pick some kind of skin color. Click OK. And we get our guy here ready for rendering. So I can tilt him up, and if you look up here, I've shown you this movie as an example before. It finds the sharp interface between his skin and the black voxels of just the empty space around in the air, but it also finds the sharp interface between the different parts of the respiratory system and the air inside of them. So we find the inside of the trachea, the inside of the bronchi, and if I were to zoom way in there, you could even see like some of the sinuses inside the head. So to create a movie from one of these surface models, by the way, notice something I'm doing here is I'm resizing the window. Because if I don't resize the window, then my movie is going to be really wide and it's just going to have all this black space on the sides. I mentioned the same thing when I was talking about doing, exporting your JPEGs, that it's a good idea to resize your window because otherwise you're just going to get all that excess black space. It's not as big a deal when you're exporting a JPEG because you can always crop the JPEG, but it's a little bit trickier with the movie because it's harder to crop a movie because you have to crop all the frames. So I've resized the window a little bit so it fits a little more closely to him. Now, if you look up at the top of the surface rendering window, you'll see there's a button up here that says Movie Export. And you might think that that's the button we want. I'm going to open it and show it to you, but this is actually not the button that we're going to use to make a movie, which is a little counterintuitive. But if I click Movie Export, I can specify a certain number of frames, but then the only option I have is to simply rotate the body 180 degrees or rotate the body 360 degrees. All this does, the Movie Export button, simply has the body spin around either halfway, 180, or all the way 360, and that's it. So that is not really very useful. So I'm going to cancel out of that and go back up to the menu up at the top of the 3D surface rendering window. And the only problem with resizing the window the way I did is that it cuts off some of the menu items up at the top. We're missing some buttons, but there are two little triangles here in the upper right. If I click the two little triangles, it'll show me all of the buttons that have been hidden because of resizing the window. And what I actually want is I want to choose a button called Fly Through. And actually, if I hadn't resized the window, you'd be able to see that that looks like a little airplane. So here it is up here in the upper right. So, oops. I keep trying to resize my window now and I keep clicking on the wrong thing. Where are you? There we go. Right, resize the window. Now I go up here to the little triangles in the upper right. I'm going to choose Fly Through. And that puts a fairly simple looking window up here. We want the little tab that says Steps. Basically, what I'm going to do to create a movie is I'm just going to create a series of keyframes. And what I'll do is I'll just put the body in whatever position I want it to be in. I'll click the little plus sign. That'll create a keyframe. Then I'll move the body a little bit to a slightly different position, hit the plus again, that'll make a new keyframe. And then move the body again, then another plus sign, make another keyframe. And then eventually what Horos will do, when we get to the end of this process, it'll create all of the intermediate frames between the keyframes that I've created. So you're probably learning some of that stuff in Maya right now about creating animations in Maya, where you create a series of keyframes and then the software interpolates the missing frames in between. So I'm going to start with this guy just facing forward. And I think I'll start out by doing a simple turntable animation where I'm just going to spin him around 360 degrees just to help kind of orient the viewer to what they're looking at. And then I'll do something else after that. So in the starting position, I'm going to click the plus sign in the fly through window. And you can see it puts a little preview of him in there. Now I'm going to do something a little tricky. There's a 3D viewer menu up in the top in Horos. And I could actually position him in a coronal view, which actually he's already in a coronal view, so he's already in that view. If I click the little not command, but the little option here to say left sagittal view, what it's going to do is it's going to rotate him 90 degrees. So we're looking at his left side straight on. So we're looking at like a perfect 90-degree rotation where he's turned to his right. And I'm going to click another keyframe here. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to rotate him 360 degrees around, but I want to do it in a series of steps. If I simply, created a keyframe with him looking straight at us and then rotated him 180 degrees so he was looking backwards, Horos wouldn't know whether to rotate him to the left or to the right, to get from facing forward to facing back. So if I turn him a little bit to the right, create a keyframe. Now, unfortunately, there is no button up here for a posterior view. So I have no choice but to use my little cube, my little 3D rotate tool, and as carefully as possible, rotate him without a lot of extra movements, preferably because Horos seems to capture those. So I've got him facing back the other way, create another keyframe. Now I'll go back to the 3D viewer menu and choose right sagittal view. And now he's rotated again farther to the right, click a fourth keyframe. And now if I want to get him facing front again, I can just click coronal view and he's back to facing the front. I can click another keyframe. Now I want to do something a little different. Okay, so he's just rotated around 360 degrees, which is kind of boring. But like I said, the whole point is just to kind of orient the viewer to understand what they're looking at anatomically. So now I'm going to do what I've often done with this guy. And I'll show you another finished version of this. I'm going to tilt him backwards. And I'm going to do this gradually, a few steps at a time. So tilt him part way back, click another keyframe, tilt him a little farther back, make another keyframe, tilt him even a little farther back, make another keyframe. And now I'll grab my magnifying glass tool and start to zoom in a little bit. Click another keyframe. You can even combine multiple movements. If I wanted to, I could, whoops, wrong tool. I could tilt him back a little bit more and zoom in a little more, all in one motion. So it'll do both things. It'll tilt him more and zoom in more. Click another keyframe. Zoom in some more. Now, I'm going to miss the entrance to the trachea. So I'll use my little move tool and start to reposition the trachea. The idea being I want to fly right up the trachea. Go back to my zoom tool and start to zoom into the trachea. I'm going to tilt a little more so that we go right in there. Another keyframe. I just find that if you make a lot of keyframes, you get a little bit better result. So now the trachea is actually bending a little bit, so I got to drag it down a little bit, zoom in a little more, make a keyframe, drag it down again, zoom in a little more, make another keyframe, drag that right to the middle, and zoom in. And I'm not going to try to go all the way up into his pharynx and fly out his nose. I'll show you an example where I took the time to do that. I'm just going to get kind of lost in here. Okay, there's actually the nasopharynx. You can see there's a little separation between the left and right nasal cavities up there. So maybe I'll zoom in a little bit more and see if I can actually get into the nasopharynx. What I find is that the farther you get into the individual, into the person, the more difficult it becomes to zoom in. It's like right now I keep dragging the the zoom tool, and it's like, I think I'm so close to the center of his head that it won't zoom in anymore. It doesn't let you zoom past the middle of his head. It only lets you zoom into the middle. So now I'm going to start backing up. I'm going to tilt, and it's easy to get very disoriented at this point, but I'm going to tilt him down, start trying to back out. It's just as hard to go backwards too at this point. All right, we're starting to back up a little bit. Make another keyframe. Gonna tilt down again. Because I kind of lost inside his head here, so it's a little hard to know exactly where I am. But I'm pretty sure I need to keep tilting this back more so that I come out in the front of his face. Not sure if I'm in his mouth or in his chin. All right, there's the pharynx. No, not too bad. I might come out the mouth instead of out of the nose. Whoops. All right, a bunch of stuff going on in there. Let's see if we can just keep zooming. Oh yeah, I came out his forehead. Tilted back a little too far. I'm going to keep zooming out. He's really tilted here. I'm going to see if I can rotate him that way, tilt him back a little bit. Keyframe. And now if I want to make sure he goes right back to where I started from, I can go back to the 3D viewer and choose coronal view, although he's a little bigger than when we started. So let me zoom out just a little bit. That'll be my final keyframe. So I've made a total of 27 keyframes. If you are in the process of making a movie, and I don't know, maybe you find that you can't get it done here in class, although you should have more than enough time to get this finished in class time today. But if you don't, you can always click the export button here in the fly-through window and save it, and you can call it whatever you want. I'll just call it Osiris Fly-Through. And cross your fingers that this works. Even if I close the surface rendering window and close the 2D viewer, as long as I go back into the same study, so I'm choosing Mannix Angio CT again. I'm going to click 2D viewer. I'm going to click create a 3D surface rendering. Choose the skin value again. I mean, the color's not going to be exactly the same, but it'll be kind of close. Click OK. I'm going to resize my window again. And then if I go back to that fly-through menu, you'll see it's blank at the moment. But if I import, and if I find that, it's actually saved as an XML file, and reopen that, it reopens all 27 keyframes. Looks like it changed the color. It went with whatever the new color was that I just picked for his skin, but I mean, that's not a big deal, but at least it kept all my keyframes. So in order to actually export this as a movie, my next step is also in the fly-through window. Instead of steps, I'm going to click the little movie tab, and I have to decide how many total frames do I want. Well, in a minute, we're going to have the option of choosing the frame rate. And you can choose essentially whatever frame rate you want, but if this was going to be like a television or movie broadcast, the standard frame rate is 30 frames per second. For a lot of internet videos, just to keep the file size down, they may go a little lower than that. They may go like 24 frames per second or something like that. But let's say that we're going to choose 30 frames per second when we get to actually the rendering process for this thing. And let's say I want to make a movie that's relatively long. I mean, it doesn't have to be that long. All I'm doing is just rotating around and flying up his trachea. So maybe, 10 or 12 seconds or something like that. So if I want 30 frames per second, and I want, say, let's say, 20 seconds. That means I need 600 frames total to be able to do that. So I'm not going to go quite that high because it'll take a while. Let's do 480. There is an assignment posted on my courses. I think I say I want a minimum of 480. Is that right? 360. Okay. All right. Even a little less. All right. Actually, let me go down to 360 then, just because it'll render faster. But so put in a total number of frames of 360. If you want, you can click loop, which just means it's going to repeat itself. Although you can set that in QuickTime, you don't have to necessarily do it in here. And I'm going to click the button that says compute. And that goes quickly. And then if I want, I can preview it by clicking the play button. It's really not necessary to click the play button, but like I say, it's just a way of previewing your movie to make sure it looks kind of like what you wanted it to look like. And it's going to look a little weird. We'll get a little lost in here, and then we'll come out his forehead, but that's basically what I wanted. And then it's just going to keep looping. So eventually you just stop it. And then down at the bottom where it says export, make sure it says QuickTime and current rendering quality, best rendering. Honestly, I've never found that it makes a whole lot of difference. And size, you can just leave as current size. It'll just export a movie that's exactly the size of your window. That's one reason why it's important to resize the window. And now click save. And here's where you specify the frame rate. So I said I wanted like a 10-second movie or something like that. Maybe I'll do 24 images per second or 24 frames per second instead of 30. I would go 24, 30, something like that, just to get a fairly smooth movie. So these computers they must have given us new computers or something, because that's fast. That rendered really quickly. So I probably could have done a lot more frames. So now it's opened it up in QuickTime Player as a QuickTime movie. And I click the little arrow and if I had kept the frame rate the same, 24 frames per second, but if I had simply made more frames, it would have slowed the movie down but that basically worked. So I'll just show you as an example. Here's one I had created before, which is pretty much the same thing. Just enlarge that a little bit so you can see it. I skipped the little turntable part, but I fly up the trachea. This time I'm pretty sure I actually get into the nose and come out the nose. Okay. So those two examples are movies exported from a surface model. And remember that we have a couple of different kinds of models that we can create. So I'm going to close the surface rendering. I've still got my 2D rendering here. I mean, I could close that too, but I'm going to go back and choose the same Mannix data set. Make sure to choose the one with the most images. Go to my 2D viewer. Now I'm going to do a 3D volume rendering. All right. And I don't know why he came up looking like that. I'm going to go ahead and put all his skin and stuff back on him. And I'm going to choose, it's just easiest to just pick coronal view here from the 3D viewer to get him facing straight in the front. Okay, so a couple of important differences with 3D volume renderings. Number one, you can do a lot more stuff with a 3D volume rendering. With a surface rendering, all you can do is move around, rotate, zoom. With a 3D volume rendering, you can move around, rotate, zoom, change transparency using the window level tool and actually animate that. And you can crop, and you can animate the crop. So if you've looked at the little assignment that's posted on my courses, I really want you to make a volume movie, not a surface movie, just because I want you to incorporate all those things. I want you to incorporate moving in and out, rotating, to create essentially a fly through, change of transparency, and cropping. Now, two other really, really important things about these 3D volume rendering movies. Two things that are going to be really important to keep in mind, two warnings. Number one, I forgot to remind you about this in the past, but I'm not going to forget today because I wrote it in big bold letters on my cheat sheet here. We want to go to the Horos menu, go to the preferences, click on the 3D tab, which is the little picture of a head. And okay, it remembered my preferences, surprisingly. But if this little button is checked down here that says auto rotate objects after 3 minutes, it only does this in the volume rendering. It doesn't do it in a surface rendering for some reason. But we want to make sure to turn that off. Because if your image starts rotating in the midst of your animation, it's just going to screw up all your keyframes and mess up your whole movie. So make sure that auto rotate is turned off. Another important warning. You can choose from any of these preset color lookup tables. There's some really weird, colorful ones. Right now, this is set to the default one, which is VR, muscle, and bone. But do not click on 8-bit or 16-bit color lookup table editor. Don't do that. Don't click on the color lookup table editor. The reason for that is that I don't know why they did this in Horos. I don't know why this is part of the program. It's the way it is. If you use the 8-bit or 16-bit color lookup table editor, it will apply those colors and that level of transparency to every single frame in your image. So even if you use the window level tool and change the transparency and try to animate that change of transparency, Horos will ignore that. And it will apply only that color lookup table editor to every single frame in your image. So in other words, you won't be able to change the transparency and actually, actually animate that. So just don't use the color lookup table editor. Yeah. You can use the color lookup table editor if you're just exporting a static JPEG. Sure, absolutely. I highly encourage that. But it's only a weird thing with the animation that if you use the color lookup table editor with an animation, it applies that to every single frame and it won't let you animate a change of transparency in your movie. As I said, you can choose from any of these preset color lookup tables and those will work. You just can't choose the CLUT editor, the CLUT editor. So you don't want that little graph to show up at the bottom, basically, because that's what happens when you pick the color lookup table editor. One other thing, oops, something in the chat here. In the fly-through window, is it possible to change the keyframe after you make it? For example, you mess up a keyframe, the camera jerks around. My experience is no. It is possible. If you look at the fly-through window, when I bring it back up again, there is a little minus sign, so you can select a keyframe and hit the minus sign. But if you go back and try to put a new keyframe in the middle, I have tried that and it just totally screws everything up. So basically you have to set your keyframes and kind of get them right at the beginning, because it's very hard to go back and edit a keyframe. So that's a good question. And you can't move the keyframe around in the window as well. I don't think so. Never actually tried moving it up or down, but don't think so. Okay. Another chat. Okay. Thumbs up. Now for this particular guy, he's got these annoying pads around his head. And as soon as I make his skin transparent, those little pads are going to disappear. So I'll be able to see things like, you know, his arteries and his bones and everything, and those will be hidden. But if I want to start out, for example, with a little turntable rotation, it might be helpful to get them out of the way. I mean, I don't want to take too much time doing this. I want you to have as much time as you need to actually finish your animation today, but I'm going to use my little scissor tool. And I'm not even going to try to get the whole thing in one shot. I'm just going to take off a big chunk of it. And then move him around a little bit, get a little more. Try to get a little closer to his head this time. Try not to cut off too much of his ear. I know there's more there. It's pressed right up against his ear though, so it's a little hard to get more than that. Like I say, I'm not going to get too picky. I have done these before where I've been really kind of obsessive about getting all of that. That's good enough for now. Let me see if I can get the other one off. The other one will probably come off easier because it looks like it's not right flat up against his ear. All right, that's good enough. So I'm gonna put him back in a straight coronal view and resize my window. Once again, I'm going to choose fly through. Now notice in a volume rendering, you've got a lot more hidden buttons here, a lot more choices, but still going to choose the fly through button, and it brings up our fly through menu. So I'm going to start out with a simple turntable animation again. So click plus sign here, rotate him to a left sagittal view, keyframe. Now I have to just very carefully by hand rotate him so he's looking backwards. And I tilted him a little bit, but it's not too bad. Another keyframe. Now we'll do a right sagittal view. Another keyframe. And back to coronal view. Another keyframe. Now I can take my window level tool, which is my transparency tool, and I can begin to try to remove There we go. Some of the tissue, and I'll probably do that over a couple of keyframes, just so it's a little bit more gradual. We'll get down here to some muscles and just barely get rid of all the muscle and leave the arteries, at least for now. And then, we could do another quick turntable. So we'll do a left sagittal view again, keyframe, rotate him. So he's looking to the back, make another keyframe, right sagittal view, another keyframe, then back to coronal, another keyframe. Now I can start having a little more fun. I can maybe rotate him a little bit. So he's looking to his right a little. And then, I don't know, let me grab the crop tool. And hard to know which dot is which. Let's see if I can. Okay, so I'm going to start cropping in from the left. I'll do this over the course of a couple keyframes. And I think I'll rotate him a little bit more to the right. Grab the crop tool again. Crop in a little more. You could even do a bunch of things, like you could start to zoom in a little bit, reposition, rotate, and crop all in one, and continue to crop in the sagittal plane, make a new keyframe. And all right, that my little zoom menu keeps getting in my way. We can zoom in some more, rotate some more, crop some more. Another keyframe. You can crop in multiple planes if you want. The only problem is that I'm so zoomed in that I wouldn't be able to see any of the little buttons to do any cropping in any other plane. But, I can continue to rotate and zoom if I want. Move down, maybe tilt the top of his head over so we can look down on some of those branches from the circle of Willis. Zoom in on those a little more. Maybe tilt them a little more. And that's good enough for now. I'm going to start tilting him back and zooming out. So basically just doing the opposite of what I just did, to kind of back out, tilt, zoom out, keyframe. Now, just for kicks, let's see what happens if I put some of his tissues back on. And do that gradually over a couple of keyframes. Getting some brain now. And let's zoom out some more. Start to rotate him back into an anterior view, maybe start to uncrop a little bit. Again, do this over a few keyframes. So rotate him, move him up, uncrop, rotate, uncrop. Let's just go ahead and uncrop the rest of the way. And then put him back in a coronal view. All right, that's going to be a bit of a jump right there, but we'll zoom out a little too. And maybe we'll start putting his skin back on also at the same time. Oops. We'll go right back to the skin view. All right, so I've got 32 keyframes. And so I'm going to go back to my movie tab. And since these computers seem to render so quickly, I'm going to make a lot of frames. I don't know, let's go nuts and do 800 and compute. Let's watch it play. Make sure I didn't screw it up too bad. You might notice some weird stuff happening, like notice his ribs just go transparent for a few seconds there. And also he seems to kind of like rock back and forth. That just seems to be a Horos thing. I've never been able to figure out a workaround to get it to stop like rocking back and forth a little bit during movements, or also to get rid of the little flickers where occasionally some part of the body will just go blank. But these are all the elements I want you to incorporate in your movie. So, you know, so rotation, zooming in and out, change of transparency, cropping. I think that's, yeah, that's all what I wanted. All right, so I previewed the animation. I can stop and playing. Once again, I'm going to choose QuickTime, best rendering, current size. Um, 24 frames per second is fine. 24 to 30, somewhere in that range. So this will take a little longer, although it's going very quickly. Yeah. Sorry. Sure. I guess if you could grab this. Let's just crop it out. Just get him in a position as you want to start. Whatever. You don't want to keep resizing that window. Black space size. Oh, I see. You want to push that. So then, So you click a, you put the plus sign and that'll be your first key thing. So your movie will start like this. And then you'll make whatever change you want to make. Move it, rotate it, change transparency, add another key. Usually I do it in relatively small steps. But you want to make sure you do all of the things that I mentioned. You want it to rotate. You do that. Change transparency. That you want to have cropping. All right, so the movie has finished. It's not going to look any different from when I previewed it. But you can see, we just got your simple turntable spin, change the transparency, a little flickering for some reason. Rotate around again, zoom and crop. So there's already a Dropbox up for you to submit your finished movie. If you finish it up quickly, then feel free to keep working on your anatomy image. And I'll be here to help out either with the animation or the anatomy image. Oh, I see. Yeah, I've never seen it do that. You may want to close 5 years and close your 3D. Close your 3D volume. Yeah. So I was very big on out and let's check sure before I. Yeah. This is great. That's a transfer. That's why it's way down to the belt. That's when they give you a kidney transplant, they don't put it up here. Put it down the pelvis, it rests on your ribs. There's a good reason why you were confused. Yeah. Yeah, it's
Yeah, I can think it was 2 hours and a half.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Should I pull it up?
No, I'm good. On paper.
Oh, it's on here.
Yeah. I'm old fashioned that way. Just a second. Yeah. That's what changed. Yeah.
Oh. When I got to because we were thinking this surface level model where we take an and scale and just go into it.
Yeah. You know, you're going to change. Started with all this. Right. Okay. Yeah, I have it on my. I just got another email. There's a form.
those of you who are on Zoom, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording because I don't have anything more to demo. But I'll stay on the Zoom if you have any questions.